I want to share a story from my time working at a casino. People often think it's a glamorous job, but trust me, it's not all it's cracked up to be, especially when you're working in the kitchen. Let me give you some background so you can understand the whole story. When I started at the casino, I was young and in college, juggling 2 part-time jobs. At first, it was just okay. I was hired as a steward, which is just a fancy way of saying dishwasher. It wasn't so bad since I had done the same job at my previous restaurant. But there were some key differences. What I liked most about my job was the variety. Since there were many restaurants, the stewards were rotated daily. One day I'd be working at the steakhouse, the next at the buffet, then the Italian restaurant, and so on. This meant I was always meeting new people and enjoying a change of scenery. Some people thought I was strange for liking this, but I figured that even if I didn't get along with someone, I wouldn't be stuck with them for long. I'd be moving on to a new place soon enough. Another thing I remember about the casino was their strong dislike for unions. Twice a year, we'd have mandatory meetings where they'd present long speeches about how bad and manipulative unions were. The employee hallways were also filled with signs warning us about the dangers of unions. After working at the casino for a while, my boss approached me with an offer to switch from part-time to full-time. I accepted, mainly because of the great benefits. Not only would I get medical and dental insurance, but I'd also have access to their lawyers and a few other perks. I'm glad I switched to full-time when I did, because a few months later, some big changes happened that nobody liked. I'm not sure what triggered them, but they had a big impact. For one, the sick note policy was scrapped. Even with a doctor's note, if you didn't show up for work, you'd get penalized with a point. This led to some gruesome scenes: cooks and stewards coming in sick, vomiting on the floor and in trash cans. Because they couldn't afford to lose a point, it would count against them when raises were handed out. Another change was that they started cutting full-time employees. Luckily, I was safe, along with my colleagues who already had full-time status. But if any of us left, our slots wouldn't be filled. From then on, each department would only have 2 full-time employees maximum. That brings me to the next major change. Essentially, the stewarding department was being eliminated. What this meant was that, although our supervisors would still be around, we would now be answerable to the chefs and managers of the various restaurants. And that was a big deal, because it meant we would no longer be rotating through different restaurants like we used to. Our jobs were about to get a lot more static. I was assigned to the steakhouse, and I was lucky to have 2 amazing coworkers, both women, and all our names started with A, so we called ourselves the AAA team. We worked well together. And I started thinking about my future at the casino. I had a goal to buy my family's cabin and move to the countryside to finish college. But my first attempt at getting a promotion failed, and I ended up training the person who got the job instead. I didn't let it get me down. I just knew I needed to improve. And that's when things started to get interesting. Our head chef was moving to the Italian restaurant, and the assistant chef was taking over. That meant we needed to hire someone new to fill the assistant chef position. Let's call him Kevin. When Kevin first joined our team, he seemed average, nothing special. We didn't have much reason to chat, as we were usually slammed with work. But about a month after he started, I had my first real conversation with him, and it was interesting. It was a busy night. Just as the dinner rush was starting to pick up, I told my coworkers I was going to refill my water bottle before things got crazy, and they said okay, they'd do the same once I got back. But just as I was about to leave the steakhouse to head to the break room, Kevin called out to me. Kevin, hey, where do you think you're going? Me just grabbing a drink before the rush starts. I mentioned it to my coworkers. Kevin, why aren't you using the drink fountain meant for waitstaff? Me confused. We were told when we started that staff should only get drinks from the break room. Kevin aggressively, don't give me that excuse. I've seen waitstaff using that fountain all the time. You're just trying to slack off. I'm going to have to write you up for this. Me wasting time? The break room is just down the hall. We've spent more time arguing about this than it would take me to actually get a drink." Kevin opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the head chef noticed US standing there and came over to see what was going on. Kevin quickly explained the situation, looking smug, but his expression changed when the chef spoke up. "Chef Kevin, Op is right. Employees are only supposed to use the break room drink fountains. _Sigh_ I need to talk to the waitress supervisor about this. Op, go get your drink. I need to talk to Kevin in private." So I did. After that, I was left feeling confused. At first, I thought Kevin might not have known about the rule. Maybe supervisors and chefs were allowed to use the waitstaff fountain. But when I talked to my coworkers, they told me similar stories. He'd nitpicked them over small things, but when they apologized, he let them off easy. They thought he was just trying to show off his power and would have gone easier on me if I hadn't questioned him. After that incident, I started to notice some strange things. The waitstaff was avoiding Kevin, clearly upset with him for enforcing the rules so strictly at their station. But what really caught my attention was how often he would hang out with them, chatting and laughing like they were old friends. He would also constantly ask my coworkers for help with tasks like peeling potatoes, leaving me to work alone for hours. And whenever I tried to have a conversation with one of my supervisors, a young woman, Kevin would abruptly yell at me to get back to work. It was then that I started to suspect he had ulterior motives, that his behavior wasn't just about being a strict boss. That summer, my suspicions about Kevin were confirmed. For those who haven't worked in a professional kitchen, it can get incredibly hot, especially during the summer months. The smells can also be overwhelming. I was scrubbing away at a massive sink, cleaning perch residue from pans, when Kevin called me to the office. This was unusual, as I only ever got called to the office for performance evaluations and raises, neither of which were due until January. Curious, I followed him to the small room, where he gestured for me to enter first. Inside, I found a woman I had never met before sitting at a desk, looking up at me with a curious expression, like, "Can I help you?" You know, that kind of look. Then Kevin spoke up as he shut the door, walking him backwards. "Kevin, Op, you stink." The woman's eyes widened in shock, and she exclaimed, "Excuse me." Kevin jumped, turning around to face her, his expression confused. It was clear he hadn't realized she was in the room. He quickly backtracked. "Sorry, I misspoke. I meant to say he has body odor issues." We've been getting complaints about his beau. The woman's gaze remained fixed on Kevin, her anger palpable. The room was tiny, and I felt claustrophobic with three of us squeezed in there. The woman's annoyance was palpable, and she was standing close to me. She said, "I don't smell anything, sir. May I get a bit closer?" I nodded, and she stepped in, her face inches from mine, taking a few sniffs. She did this 2 or 3 times before pulling back, her expression unconvincingly polite. "Woman, I don't smell anything." That's when I decided to speak up. I said, "Look, if someone thinks I smell, I apologize. But let's be real. I'm working in a hot room with greasy sinks, harsh chemicals, and fried fish residue on the pans. And these aprons we're given aren't exactly the most absorbent or hygienic." I gestured to my shift, which was damp and stained with fish bits, to drive my point home. The woman nodded. "I understand. I'll take a look at those aprons and see if they need to be replaced." She turned to me. "Op, why don't you take a break and cool off in the break room for a bit then?" Her tone shifted. "Kevin, you stay. We need to have a word." It was clear that she was not happy with Kevin, and I wondered what was going to happen next. After that incident, 3 significant changes occurred. Firstly, the stewards received new aprons, which was a long overdue upgrade and a welcome relief for all of us. Secondly, Kevin was no longer allowed to confront me alone. Another staff member had to be present as a witness. If none were available, I was to seek out the steakhouse manager, the woman who had intervened earlier. Thirdly, Kevin's behavior towards me escalated. While he couldn't bully me in private, he began publicly berating me, yelling at me across the room for minor infractions or simply for standing around. It became clear that he saw me as an obstacle to his pursuit of the female staff members, with whom I had good relationships. I even wondered if he perceived me as a rival, like a character from a harem anime. Given how many women I worked with, for over a year, I tried everything to stop Kevin's harassment while still pursuing the supervisor position. I filed complaints with HR, but they just shrugged them off, asking me what I expected them to do about it. My head supervisor told me to toughen up, saying I needed thicker skin. It felt like the situation was deteriorating daily. To make matters worse, I fell victim to identity theft twice, once with my bank account and again with my tax return. The bank refused to help, and the casino's legal department dragged their feet, leaving me in financial distress for a long time. I had to collect cans in the break room to afford gas, and even had to rehome one of my cats. With Kevin's constant bullying adding to my stress, there were days when I felt overwhelmed and hopeless, even contemplating suicide. It was a really dark time in my life. Fortunately, I had some kind coworkers who showed their support. They gave me small food packages, and some line cooks even snuck me leftover meat that was about to be thrown away. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a freezing concert night. So cold that several keys snapped in the door locks because they had frozen shut. I managed to start my car and let it run for a few minutes before heading back to the locker room to escape into my book, my only solace at the time. My plan was to read just a couple of pages before leaving. But little did I know that this night would be different. But before I could even finish the first paragraph of my book, the locker room doors swung open and Kevin marched in. He scanned the room, his eyes locking onto me with a sinister grin spreading across his face. "Who told you you could punch out, Op?" he sneered. "Not me. That's for sure. I just got a complaint from the night crew that your dishwasher is a mess. You clearly didn't clean it at all," he glared at me, his voice dripping with malice. "Now, get back there and clean it right now, and if I see you punching in, you're fired." Kevin stormed out of the room, laughing, leaving me in a state of shock and confusion. I felt paralyzed with fear, thinking about the consequences of losing my job. I was already struggling to pay my student loans, my parents' rent, and barely scraping by to care for my remaining cat. The weight of it all hit me, and for a moment, I felt like I might break down in tears. But then, my fear turned to fury. I'd had enough of Kevin's bullying and harassment. I didn't care if he had the authority or not. I was done. I stood up, fueled by my anger, and made a plan. I decided to swallow my pride and tell my parents about my identity theft and ask for their help. I would move back in with them and seek their assistance in finding a new job. It meant giving up my dream home in the country, but stability was more important to me now. I was ready to take control of my life and escape the toxic situation at work. But then, a sly grin spread across my face as a clever idea struck me. Kevin wanted me to clean the dishwasher without punching back in. Bring it on. I left the locker room, tuning out the security guard's call as I focused on my plan. I entered the kitchen, where a mountain of dishes, pots, pans, and other items awaited cleaning, a typical concert night chaos. I ignored the mess and the 3 stewards working hard to shut down the machine and empty it. I was on a mission to take Kevin's order to an absurd level. One of the night stewards approached me, confusion etched on his face. "What are you doing?" "Op," I explained. "Kevin told me that you guys said the dishwasher wasn't cleaned and it was a mess, so I had to come back and clean it without punching in, or I'd be fired." The room fell silent, and the color drained from everyone's faces. Finally, one of them spoke up. "We didn't see Kevin, and the machine was spotless when we arrived." I felt a pang of guilt, realizing my actions would put them behind schedule. But I was determined to follow Kevin's orders to the letter, making sure everyone knew who had sent me. As I continued, one of the stewards left to fetch the night supervisor. The remaining two started arguing over whether Kevin had the authority to order us to stay past our shifts and fire us if we refused. The casino's questionable practices, like offering rooms to employees during snowstorms only to make them work all night, added fuel to their debate. When the night supervisor arrived, she asked me what was going on. I explained the situation while continuing to clean the dishwasher. She listened intently, then revealed that Kevin hadn't spoken to her and had already left for the night. She assured me that he didn't have the authority to fire me, but I was too exhausted and fed up to take any chances. I asked her how to submit my 2-week notice, which seemed to confuse her further. She wondered why I was leaving if I was already planning to quit anyway. I explained that I needed time to make arrangements for my future, and that receiving one last paycheck was crucial. So I filled out the paperwork, including my reasons for leaving, and headed home. It was 3 a.m. when I finally collapsed onto my bed, still wearing my uniform, and let the exhaustion take over. The next morning, my phone rang, jolting me awake. It was the casino. The head stewarding supervisor asked me to come in for a meeting about the previous night's events. Initially, I declined, not wanting to go back and forth for a conversation. But he insisted it was important, piquing my curiosity. I agreed to come in a couple of hours. When I arrived, I was led to the steakhouse office, which was packed with people. The night supervisor, security officer, my supervisors, several head chefs, and the steakhouse manager were all present, their faces tense. The manager's expression was particularly fiery as she glared at the one person sitting, hunched over like a scolded child, Kevin. Then, they revealed that they had uncovered the truth. After my conversation with the night supervisor, she reviewed the security footage, which showed Kevin peeking out the door, heading to the locker room, and leaving with a smirk just minutes before I left. She confronted him the next morning, but he tried to deny the incident, accusing me of lying to frame him. However, the supervisors were skeptical, pointing out that they had the security guard's testimony and the footage to verify the truth. Kevin's story kept changing as he tried to wriggle out of the situation, claiming I must have misheard him and that he would never tell me to work without punching in. But the night supervisor and the others in the room pressed him with questions. Why would I lie? Who told him the machine needed cleaning? Why was he the only one who needed permission to leave? Kevin's lies were exposed, and he finally realized he had been caught red-handed. The steakhouse manager turned to me, apologized, and asked if I would consider staying. The head manager also apologized and extended the same offer. Initially, I was inclined to decline, but then a bold idea struck me. If I stayed, I might have a chance to become a supervisor myself and avoid leaving. So, I agreed to stay on one condition: Kevin was not allowed to speak to me again unless it was an emergency. If he had any issues with my work, he had to go through the head chef. They agreed to my terms. Later, I heard a few reasons why they finally took action against Kevin. One possibility was that someone higher up finally noticed my written complaints and was demanding answers. Another reason was that they didn't want to lose me yet, as I was one of only 2 employees who knew how to work in every restaurant, making me a valuable asset. But the most likely reason was the union's involvement. News of the incident had spread quickly throughout the casino, and if they didn't address it, the union reps might take advantage of the situation. In the end, I ended up staying in the steakhouse longer than Kevin did. He left 2 years later, and I celebrated by offering to throw a pizza party for the entire team the day after his departure. It was a small way to mark the occasion and show my appreciation for my colleagues who had supported me through a difficult time.